My name is Elizabeth Morgan, 38 years old, and I never expected to be fired at exactly 12:02 in the morning while on a video call with 5 of the most powerful CEOs in America. When my boss Leonard suddenly announced, "You're terminated," I felt the world stop spinning. 16 years of dedication, a $1.6 billion deal on the line, and 3 decades of business relationships hung in the balance. But instead of panic, I felt something unexpected rise within me: absolute clarity. If you're watching this and know what it feels like to have everything pulled out from under you in your career, drop a comment below. And before I tell you how I turned this disaster into my greatest triumph, hit that subscribe button. Let me take you back to where it all began. At 22, fresh out of business school, with stars in my eyes and determination in my heart, I started as an intern at Global Nexus Enterprises, or GNE, as everyone called it. Back then, GNE was an up-and-coming player in corporate consulting, specializing in international business deals. I was assigned to the mergers and acquisitions team, essentially getting coffee and making copies for senior executives. What those executives did not know was that I stayed late every night studying their negotiation tactics, reading through deal structures, and learning everything I could about international business law. 6 months into my internship, when a junior analyst called in sick, I volunteered to step in for a client presentation. The senior partner was skeptical but desperate enough to give me a chance. I nailed it. Not only did I present the data flawlessly, but I also pointed out an opportunity in the contract language that could save our client nearly $2 million. By the end of that week, I was offered a full-time position, the youngest analyst GNE had ever hired. Fast forward 16 years, and I had become the company's top deal broker, specializing in complex multi-billion-dollar international contracts. My reputation for creating win-win scenarios while protecting our clients' interests made me the go-to person for high-stakes negotiations. I had personally closed deals worth over $37 billion during my career at GNE. The deal on the table that fateful night was particularly significant. It involved 5 major corporations joining forces for an international expansion project across 3 continents. These weren't just any clients. They were industry giants whose combined annual revenue exceeded $200 billion. Maxwell Henderson of Henderson Technologies was a 62-year-old tech visionary who had transformed his garage startup into a global empire. Julia Winters ran Winters Manufacturing, a 3rd-generation family business that had revolutionized industrial production techniques. Samuel Richardson headed Apex Solutions, the software company that powered half the Fortune 500. Victoria Hamilton led Hamilton Pharmaceuticals, pioneering treatments that had saved millions of lives. And Benjamin Wilson of Wilson Energy was at the forefront of the renewable energy revolution. These 5 companies rarely collaborated, each protective of their market position, but I had spent 18 months bringing them together for this unprecedented joint venture. The $1.6 billion deal would create a revolutionary business ecosystem combining technology, manufacturing, software, healthcare, and energy solutions in emerging markets. For me, this wasn't just another contract. It represented the culmination of relationships I had nurtured for over a decade. I had attended Maxwell Henderson's daughter's wedding. I had helped Julia Winters navigate a difficult corporate restructuring during the last recession. I had spent countless hours understanding each company's vision and finding the common ground where all could benefit. My boss, Leonard Thompson, had been appointed CEO of GNE just 3 years ago. Unlike me, who had climbed through the ranks, Leonard came from outside with a reputation for aggressive growth strategies. At 54, he was known for his cutthroat approach and political maneuvering. Initially, he valued my client relationships and deal-making abilities, frequently praising my work during board meetings. But over the past year, something had shifted. Leonard began taking more credit for my accomplishments. He inserted himself into client meetings at the last minute. My team noticed that my name was being mentioned less in company-wide communications about major deals. I was being excluded from strategic planning sessions I had previously led. I should have seen the warning signs, but I was too focused on making this 5-way deal work. The board had made it clear that this contract would determine GNE's direction for the next decade. The pressure was immense, but pressure was where I had always thrived. What I didn't realize was that Leonard saw me as a threat. Several board members had mentioned me as a potential future CEO. My client relationships were deeper than his, my deal success rate higher. In the corporate world, such threats are often eliminated, not celebrated. Despite receiving offers from competitors over the years, some with significantly higher salaries, I had remained loyal to GNE. This was my professional home, where I had grown from an eager intern to a respected executive. I believed in building something lasting rather than jumping ship for short-term gains. That loyalty, as I would soon discover, was not reciprocated. The midnight call was scheduled to accommodate the various time zones of our international participants. For me in New York, it meant a midnight start. For Maxwell Henderson in San Francisco, it was 9 p.m. Julia Winters would be joining from Chicago at 11 p.m. Samuel Richardson was actually in Tokyo, making it 2 p.m. the following day for him. Victoria Hamilton would be calling in from London at 5 a.m. her time, and Benjamin Wilson from Sydney at 3 p.m. I had been preparing for days, reviewing every clause in the contracts, anticipating questions, and ensuring all legal teams were aligned. My home office was transformed into a command center, with multiple monitors displaying contract versions, comparison documents, and presentation slides. A stack of printed contracts sat on my desk, sticky notes marking key sections that might need discussion. At around 7 p.m., as I was reviewing the final presentation, my assistant Stephanie called. We had worked together for 8 years, and she knew every aspect of my professional life. "Elizabeth, do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice carrying an unusual edge. "Of course, Steph. What's up?" I continued, organizing my notes as we spoke. "I overheard something today that you should know about," she said, lowering her voice. Leonard was in the conference room with Daniel Cooper from the International Division. They were talking about tonight's call, and Leonard said something about after Elizabeth is out of the picture. I couldn't hear everything, but it didn't sound good. Daniel Cooper was a relatively new hire who had been aggressively positioning himself as Leonard's right-hand man. He had made several attempts to insert himself into my client relationships, often scheduling meetings without my knowledge. "Are you sure that's what you heard?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Positive. And there's more. They've scheduled a board meeting for 7 a.m. tomorrow. That's unusually early, and it wasn't on the calendar yesterday." I thanked Stephanie for the warning but tried to dismiss the concern. Maybe they were discussing a reorganization after the deal was signed. Perhaps Leonard was planning to move me to a different division or give me a new role. Still, the timing was suspicious. At 8:30 p.m. my phone rang again. It was my best friend Natalie Parker, a corporate attorney I had known since college. "Just checking if you're ready for the big call," she said cheerfully. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, sharing Stephanie's warning. Natalie's tone turned serious. "Elizabeth, you've been telling me about Leonard's behavior for months. This isn't a coincidence. You need to protect yourself." "What am I supposed to do? Cancel the biggest deal of my career because of office gossip?" "No, but document everything. Record the call if it's legal in your state, and have your attorney on standby." Our conversation reminded me of all the personal sacrifices I'd made for GNE over the years. The broken engagement when my fiancé couldn't handle my travel schedule. Missing my grandfather's funeral because I was closing a deal in Singapore. Postponing having children year after year because the timing was never right. I had given everything to this company, believing I was building something meaningful. After hanging up with Natalie, I noticed an email that had arrived while we were talking. It was from Catherine Foster, one of GNE's board members, accidentally copied to me instead of someone else. The message was brief, but alarming. "Leonard's plan for EM seems extreme. Timing is questionable. We'll call to discuss." EM, my initials. Leonard had a plan for me that even a board member found extreme. For a moment, I considered calling Leonard directly to confront him. But 16 years in corporate negotiations had taught me the value of information and timing. If something was brewing, I needed to understand it fully before showing my hand. Instead, I focused on my preparation. If Leonard was planning some kind of power play, the best defense was to ensure this deal went perfectly. My clients trusted me, not him. Their loyalty could be my protection. At 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the scheduled call, my phone lit up with Leonard's name. "Elizabeth," he said without preamble, "I need to speak with you privately before the call." "We're cutting it close, Leonard," I replied calmly. "Whatever it is, can it wait until after we secure the signatures?" "This is important," he insisted. "It relates to the call." "Then let's discuss it now," I said, already opening my recording app as Natalie had suggested. "Not over the phone," he said curtly. "Join the video conference 15 minutes early." Before I could respond, he hung up. The knot in my stomach tightened, but I focused on my breathing. Whatever Leonard was planning, I needed to be clear-headed and strategic. 16 years of deal-making had prepared me for high-pressure situations. This was just another negotiation, albeit one where my career was apparently at stake. At 11:45 p.m., I logged into the video conference. Leonard was already there, but he wasn't alone. Daniel Cooper sat beside him, dressed in a suit, despite the late hour. They appeared to be in Leonard's office, at GNE headquarters. Elizabeth Leonard nodded coolly. We need to make some adjustments to tonight's presentation. Adjustments. I kept my voice neutral. The contracts have been reviewed by all parties. Making changes now would delay signatures. Daniel will be taking the lead on presenting the final terms, Leonard said, not quite meeting my eyes. That's not appropriate, I replied firmly. I've been the point person on this deal from day one. The clients are expecting me to lead the discussion. It's been decided, Leonard said, a finality in his tone that I recognized from previous non-negotiable directives. Decided by whom? The clients specifically requested that I handle the final terms. Leonard's face hardened. By me. As CEO of this company, I determine who leads client communications. I noticed Daniel smirking slightly behind Leonard. Something was definitely wrong. Before I could press further, the meeting notification chimed. Our clients were beginning to join the call. We'll continue this discussion later, Leonard said, plastering on his client's smile as Maxwell Henderson's face appeared on screen. Whatever ambush Leonard had planned, it was too late to prevent it now. I would have to navigate whatever came next in real time, with 5 of the world's most powerful CEOs watching. As the clock struck midnight, our virtual meeting room filled with faces. Maxwell Henderson appeared first, his silver hair and round glasses reflecting the glow of his computer screen. Julia Winters joined next, looking remarkably put together despite the late hour in Chicago. Samuel Richardson connected from a sleek Tokyo conference room, the afternoon sun streaming through windows behind him. Victoria Hamilton, ever the professional, showed no signs of the early London morning as she greeted everyone with a warm smile. Benjamin Wilson was the last to join his Sydney office overlooking the harbor. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, depending on where you're calling from. I began with the greeting I had used throughout our international negotiations. Thank you all for accommodating this unusual meeting time. We appreciate your flexibility. Leonard immediately jumped in. Yes, thank you all for joining. We at GNE are excited to finalize this historic collaboration. I noticed the slight emphasis on we at GNE, but continued smoothly. As you can see from the agenda I sent earlier, we'll start with a brief review of the final terms, address any remaining questions, and then proceed to signatures. We've prepared electronic documents that can be signed securely during this call. Julia Winters spoke up. Elizabeth I want to thank you personally for your extraordinary work bringing us all together. When you first proposed this collaboration 18 months ago, I was skeptical that competitors could work together so seamlessly. Hear, hear, Maxwell Henderson added. Elizabeth, you've performed nothing short of a miracle, getting 5 companies with competing interests to find common ground. I felt a surge of gratitude for their acknowledgement. Thank you, but the vision was always yours. I simply helped translate it into a workable framework. Leonard cleared his throat. Let's proceed with the review. Daniel Cooper from our international division will walk us through the final terms. 5 faces registered surprise on my screen. Victoria Hamilton spoke first. I'm sorry, but who is Daniel Cooper? We've been working exclusively with Elizabeth on this deal. Mr. Cooper is one of our executives who has been working behind the scenes on this project, Leonard explained smoothly. He has a comprehensive understanding of the final agreement. This was a blatant lie. Daniel had seen the contracts only in the past week, and his knowledge of the complex negotiations was superficial at best. With all due respect, Samuel Richardson interjected, we've spent 18 months developing this deal with Elizabeth. At this critical juncture, introducing a new point person seems unnecessary and potentially disruptive. Leonard's smile tightened. I understand your concern, but as CEO, I make staffing decisions based on the company's best interests. Daniel will be taking a more active role in this partnership moving forward, so it makes sense for him to handle the final review. I maintained my professional demeanor, despite the growing tension. Perhaps we can compromise. I'll lead the review of the terms as originally planned, and Daniel can address any questions about implementation moving forward. Before Leonard could object, Benjamin Wilson nodded. That seems sensible. Elizabeth knows the nuances of our negotiations better than anyone. Outvoted Leonard reluctantly agreed. I began my presentation methodically reviewing the key points of the agreement, the special provisions each company had requested, and the mutual benefits of the collaboration. Throughout my presentation, I noticed Leonard sending text messages, his attention clearly elsewhere. When I reached the section on profit sharing, Leonard interrupted. Actually, there's been a slight modification to this section since the last draft. My heart skipped a beat. I had finalized these contracts myself just yesterday. There had been no authorized changes. What modification? I asked, keeping my voice steady. The board felt that the administrative fee structure needed adjustment, Leonard said smoothly. Daniel, would you explain the changes? Daniel leaned forward. Instead of the flat 2% administrative fee we originally discussed, we've implemented a graduated structure that begins at 3% and increases based on performance metrics. Maxwell Henderson frowned. That's not what we agreed to. Elizabeth assured us that the fee structure was fixed at 2% specifically to provide budget certainty. Market conditions have changed, Leonard replied. The board determined that a variable structure better reflects the value GNE brings to the partnership. I watched the faces of my clients, seeing confusion turn to concern. This wasn't just a minor change. It fundamentally altered the economics of the deal in GNE's favor, potentially costing the partners tens of millions of additional dollars. Leonard, I said carefully, I wasn't informed of this change. The contracts I reviewed yesterday maintained the 2% fee we all agreed upon. The final decision was made this morning, he replied dismissively. The updated contracts were distributed to all parties. This was another lie. I knew from my earlier calls with the client's legal teams that they had received no such updates. As Daniel continued explaining other adjustments, I received a private message from Victoria Hamilton. Elizabeth, what's happening? These changes contradict everything we've discussed. I replied honestly, I'm as surprised as you are. These changes were not authorized by me. The meeting continued with growing tension as more unauthorized modifications came to light. A change to the intellectual property provisions, a new clause about early termination penalties, adjustments to the governance structure that gave GNE more control than previously agreed. With each revelation, I could see the trust I had spent 18 months building beginning to erode. Samuel Richardson's expression had hardened into a mask of disapproval. Julia Winters was furiously taking notes, presumably documenting the discrepancies. Benjamin Wilson had stepped away from his camera, likely consulting with his legal team. At 11 minutes past midnight, Maxwell Henderson raised his hand. I think we need to address the elephant in the room. These changes are substantial and were never discussed during our negotiations. Elizabeth, as our primary contact, can you explain what's going on? All eyes turned to me. This was the moment of truth. I could either defend changes I hadn't authorized and didn't agree with, or I could contradict my CEO in front of our largest clients. Before I could respond, Leonard spoke. Actually, there's something else we need to discuss before proceeding. His tone sent a chill through me. This was it. Whatever he had been planning was about to be revealed. Elizabeth Morgan is no longer authorized to represent GNE. In these negotiations, Leonard announced, his voice suddenly formal. Effective immediately at 12:02 am, Elizabeth Morgan is terminated from Global Nexus Enterprises. The silence that followed Leonard's announcement was deafening. 5 shocked faces stared back at me through the screen, while Leonard maintained a practiced expression of regret. Daniel Cooper, seated beside him, couldn't quite hide his smirk of satisfaction. I apologize for the unfortunate timing, Leonard continued, but given the importance of this deal, the board felt it necessary to address certain concerns immediately. Elizabeth has been exceeding her authority in these negotiations, making promises GNE cannot fulfill and misrepresenting our capabilities. The accusations hit me like physical blows. Not only was I being fired in front of my clients, but Leonard was attempting to destroy my professional reputation in the process. That's absolutely false, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Every term I negotiated was approved through proper channels. Elizabeth, Leonard cut in. This is not up for discussion. Your company access has already been revoked. You should leave this call immediately. Daniel Cooper will be taking over as the primary contact for this partnership moving forward. My first instinct was to disconnect, to retreat, and process what had just happened. 16 years of dedication ended in 12 seconds of public humiliation. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the expressions on my clients' faces, or perhaps it was the culmination of months of subtle undermining by Leonard. Whatever the reason, I stayed on the call, silent but present. Samuel Richardson was the first to speak. "Leonard, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. Terminating your lead negotiator in the middle of a client call shows questionable judgment at best." "I understand your concern," Leonard replied smoothly, "but this action was necessary due to information that came to light recently. We wanted to be transparent with all of you, rather than proceeding under false pretenses." "What exactly are you accusing Elizabeth of?" Julia Winters asked, her voice sharp. "Because from where I sit, she's been nothing but forthright and meticulous throughout this entire process." Leonard launched into a series of vague allegations about unauthorized commitments and procedural violations. As he spoke, I noticed Victoria Hamilton typing furiously on her phone, her eyes occasionally flicking up to the camera. Maxwell Henderson's expression had darkened considerably, while Benjamin Wilson had returned to his seat and was watching Leonard with narrowed eyes. "Now, if we could return to the revised agreement," Leonard concluded, gesturing to Daniel. "Actually," Maxwell Henderson interrupted, "I think we need a moment to process this development. Could we take a 15-minute break before continuing?" Leonard clearly wanted to refuse, but recognized he couldn't alienate 5 major clients simultaneously. "Of course. We'll reconvene at 12:30. As most participants disabled their cameras, I remained frozen in my seat, trying to process what had just happened. My career at GNE was over. My professional reputation was under attack. The deal I had spent 18 months crafting was being systematically dismantled. Yet amidst the shock, something else was happening. My analytical mind, honed by years of complex negotiations, began to work through the situation logically. Why would Leonard fire me now, at this specific moment? Why alter the contracts at the last minute? What did he stand to gain? I quickly opened the revised contract Daniel had shared in the meeting chat. As I scanned through the document, comparing it to my original version, a pattern emerged. The changes weren't just beneficial to GNE. Many of them specifically increased Leonard's compensation through performance bonuses tied to the new fee structure. Some provisions created direct reporting lines to him, bypassing normal corporate governance. This wasn't just about eliminating me as a rival. Leonard was using my removal to fundamentally alter the deal in ways that personally benefited him. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Hamilton. "Elizabeth, are you okay? This is outrageous. Can you talk privately?" I replied affirmatively, and moments later received a video call request. When I connected, I found not just Victoria, but all 5 CEOs in a separate meeting. Elizabeth Maxwell began without preamble. "We've known each other for over a decade. I trust you. What's really happening here?" Taking a deep breath, I explained my suspicions. "I believe Leonard is using my termination as cover to modify the agreement in ways that benefit him personally. The changes you're seeing weren't approved by GNE's board or legal team." "That matches what our legal department just told me," Samuel Richardson nodded. "The new fee structure would trigger substantial performance bonuses for senior management, primarily Leonard. And the governance changes give him direct control over project decisions that should require board approval," Julia added. Benjamin Wilson leaned forward. "Elizabeth, where do you stand legally? Does your termination affect the original agreement we all worked on?" It was a crucial question, and one I hadn't considered in my shock. What were my legal rights in this situation? "I need to consult my attorney," I admitted. "But regardless of my employment status, the contracts we finalized yesterday represent the actual terms we all agreed to. Leonard has no authority to unilaterally change those terms." "We won't sign anything today," Victoria stated firmly. "Not until this situation is clarified." "Agreed," Maxwell said. "But Elizabeth, you should know that we want to work with you, not whoever this Daniel person is. Our companies entered this partnership largely because of the trust you've built with each of us." Their support was heartening, but I knew the reality of corporate politics. "I appreciate that, but I'm no longer a GNE employee. My ability to represent your interests is compromised." "Perhaps," Julia said thoughtfully, "but your knowledge of the deal isn't—" We have 15 minutes before reconvening. Use that time wisely. As they disconnected, I immediately called Gabrielle Watson, my attorney. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. Elizabeth, what's wrong? She knew I wouldn't call past midnight unless it was urgent. I quickly explained the situation, including Leonard's public termination and the contract alterations. First, don't leave that call, Gabrielle advised. Your presence is your power right now. Second, I need to review your employment contract immediately. There may be provisions about intellectual property and client relationships that are relevant. I forwarded her my employment agreement while keeping one eye on the clock. 12 minutes until the meeting resumed. Elizabeth, Gabrielle said after a few moments, "Did you develop the negotiation framework for this deal?" "Yes, it's based on my multi-party alignment methodology. I created it 3 years ago for the Asian market expansion." "And did you register that methodology with the patent office, as we discussed?" "Yes," I confirmed, remembering the intellectual property protection Gabrielle had insisted upon when I first developed the approach. "Then we have leverage," she said. "Your employment contract specifies that while GNE owns the client relationships, you retain intellectual property rights to methodologies you develop. The framework underlying this specific deal structure is your property, which GNE has been licensed to use." "What does that mean practically?" I asked, watching the seconds tick away. "It means they can't implement this deal without your consent, at least not using the structure you created. And based on what you're telling me, the entire agreement is built on your framework." A plan began forming in my mind. "Can you join the call when it resumes? I may need legal representation." "Absolutely. Send me the link. And Elizabeth, remember, knowledge is power. You know more about this deal than anyone. Use that." As 12:30 approached, I felt a strange calm descend. The initial shock had passed, replaced by strategic clarity. Leonard had made a critical error in assuming I would simply disappear after being terminated. He didn't realize that in building deep relationships with these clients over the years, I had created a power base independent of my position at GNE. The meeting resumed with Leonard looking surprisingly confident. "Thank you for your patience. Shall we continue with the review of the revised terms?" "Before we do," I interjected, "I'd like to clarify something important." Leonard's expression darkened. "Elizabeth, as I stated earlier, you are no longer employed by GNE and have no standing in these negotiations. I must insist that you leave this call immediately." "Actually," I replied calmly, "while you have terminated my employment, there are legal considerations that affect my participation in this specific discussion. My attorney will be joining us momentarily to address those considerations." As if on cue, Gabrielle Watson's name appeared in the waiting room. I admitted her to the call. "This is highly inappropriate," Leonard sputtered, but he was interrupted by Maxwell Henderson. "I think we all want clarity on the situation before proceeding," Maxwell said firmly. "I, for one, am unwilling to sign any agreement until I understand exactly what's happening here." The other CEOs nodded in agreement, and Leonard had no choice but to allow the discussion to continue. The power dynamic was shifting, and we all knew it. "Allow me to introduce Gabrielle Watson, my legal counsel," I said, as Gabrielle's image appeared on screen. "She has some information relevant to our discussion." Gabrielle nodded professionally. "Thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone. I'll be brief. While Mr. Thompson has the authority to terminate Miss Morgan's employment, there are specific provisions in her contract with GNE that affect the intellectual property underlying this particular agreement." Leonard's face flushed. "This is internal GNE business and has no bearing on our client relationships." "On the contrary," Gabrielle continued calmly, "the multi-party alignment framework that structures this entire agreement was developed by Elizabeth Morgan independently and is protected under U.S. patent law. GNE has been licensed to use this methodology through Elizabeth's employment, but with that employment terminated, the license is now in question." Daniel Cooper leaned over to whisper something to Leonard, whose expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. Taking advantage of the moment, I shared my screen, displaying side-by-side comparisons of the original contract terms and Leonard's revised version. "While we're addressing legal matters," I said, "I'd like to highlight some concerning discrepancies between the agreement we all finalized yesterday and the version presented today." Methodically, I walked through each significant change, explaining not just the difference but the implications. The increased fee structure that would cost the partner companies an additional $87 million over 5 years. The governance changes that removed key oversight provisions. The intellectual property clauses that gave GNE perpetual rights to technologies developed during the partnership. Most notably, I concluded many of these changes create direct financial benefits for certain GNE executives through the bonus structure tied to administrative fees. The implication was clear without having to name Leonard specifically. I could see the realization dawning on each CEO's face as they connected the dots between my sudden termination and the contract modifications. Victoria Hamilton spoke first. Leonard, were these changes approved by GNE's board of directors? The board granted me authority to finalize the agreement as appropriate, Leonard replied evasively. That's not what I asked, Victoria pressed. Did the board specifically approve these changes to the fee structure and governance provisions? Leonard's hesitation was answer enough. I've just received confirmation from our legal department. Samuel Richardson interjected that the contracts we reviewed and approved yesterday did not contain these modifications. No updated versions were sent to us, contrary to what was claimed earlier. Benjamin Wilson nodded. Our legal team says the same. The changes presented tonight are entirely new and substantially alter the economics of the partnership. Leonard attempted to regain control. There appears to be some confusion. Daniel, please clarify the approval process for the revisions. Daniel looked like a deer in headlights, clearly unprepared to defend the indefensible. The revisions were processed through normal channels and communicated to all stakeholders. That's demonstrably false, Julia Winters said sharply. Our legal department has no record of receiving revised contracts. As Leonard and Daniel floundered, I received a private message from Catherine Foster, the board member whose email had accidentally warned me. Elizabeth Reist have been monitoring the call. The board never approved these changes. Leonard is acting without authorization. This was the confirmation I needed. I replied asking if she would be willing to join the call, and moments later her name appeared in the waiting room. I'd like to add someone to our discussion, I announced, admitting Catherine to the meeting. Leonard's face drained of color as Catherine Foster's image appeared on screen. Catherine, this is irregular. We're in the middle of client negotiations. I'm aware, Leonard, she replied coolly. As head of the board's audit committee, I feel my presence is necessary given the questions being raised about contract approvals. Turning to the group, Catherine continued. I want to clarify that the GNE board approved the contract terms as negotiated by Elizabeth Morgan. The modifications presented tonight were not submitted for board review or approval. The revelation landed like a bombshell. Leonard had been caught in a blatant lie attempting to modify a $1 billion agreement for personal gain without proper authorization. In light of this information, Maxwell Henderson said slowly, I propose we return to the original contract terms that were properly negotiated and approved. I second that, Victoria added immediately. Leonard was cornered, but still dangerous. Even if we revert to the original terms, Elizabeth is no longer authorized to represent GNE. Her termination stands. That brings us back to the intellectual property question, Gabrielle interjected. The framework underlying this agreement is Elizabeth's patented methodology. Without her involvement, GNE lacks the legal right to implement the structure as designed. For the first time, genuine alarm showed on Leonard's face. He had clearly not anticipated this complication when planning my termination. What exactly are you suggesting? Julia Winters asked, looking at me intently. Taking a deep breath, I laid out the proposition that had been forming in my mind. The partnership we've designed is valuable for all your companies. The framework I've created enables that collaboration while protecting each party's interests. Rather than abandoning 18 months of work, I propose an alternative. I will provide consultation services directly to the 5 partner companies to implement the original agreement independent of GNE. Leonard exploded. That's a direct violation of your non-compete clause. GNE will sue you for every penny you have. Gabrielle smiled slightly. Actually, Mr. Thompson, by terminating Elizabeth without cause during a client meeting, you've created a clear case of wrongful termination and defamation. Any attempt to enforce the non-compete under these circumstances would almost certainly fail in court, not to mention expose GNE to substantial liability. Catherine Foster nodded. I believe Gabrielle is correct. Furthermore, as a board member, I'm concerned about the legal and reputational damage Leonard's actions tonight may have caused. This will need to be addressed by the full board immediately. Maxwell Henderson leaned forward. Elizabeth, if you were to establish an independent consultancy, my company would be interested in retaining your services immediately, specifically for this partnership, but potentially for other matters as well. Henderson Technologies would be our first client, but not the last, Samuel Richardson added. Apex Solutions would follow immediately. One by one, each CEO expressed support for continuing to work with me directly. The very clients Leonard had hoped to turn against me were instead rallying to my side. Leonard made one final desperate attempt. This is corporate theft. You're stealing G&E clients. No one is stealing anything, Catherine corrected firmly. These companies are free to work with whatever consultants they choose. Elizabeth is free to offer her services after being wrongfully terminated. And the board will be very interested in reviewing your actions tonight, Leonard. The tide had turned completely. Within 30 minutes of being publicly fired, I had not only maintained my professional standing, but potentially established the foundation for my own consulting firm, with 5 industry giants as founding clients. I suggest we take another short break, Victoria Hamilton proposed. Elizabeth needs time to consult with her attorney about establishing her new business entity, and we all need to consult with our respective legal teams about next steps. As the meeting paused again, I sat back in my chair, still processing the whirlwind of events, from career catastrophe to entrepreneurial opportunity in less than an hour. The path forward was suddenly clear, illuminated by the very crisis that had threatened to destroy me. When the meeting resumed at 1:15 a.m., the atmosphere had transformed. Leonard and Daniel remained on the call, but were notably subdued. Catherine Foster had been joined by 2 additional board members, suggesting an emergency board discussion was occurring in parallel with our client call. We've consulted with our respective legal departments, Maxwell Henderson began, and we've reached a unanimous decision. The 5 companies represented here wish to proceed with the partnership as originally structured in the contracts finalized yesterday. However, we will not be proceeding with G&E as the administering entity. Leonard started to protest, but Catherine raised her hand to silence him. Leonard, I suggest you listen carefully before responding. Maxwell continued. Instead, we propose engaging Elizabeth Morgan's newly formed consultancy as the coordinating party for the partnership. Our legal teams believe this presents the cleanest solution given the circumstances. Samuel Richardson added. We've drafted a term sheet for a new administrative agreement that would replace G&E's role with Elizabeth's firm maintaining all other aspects of the partnership as originally designed. Leonard finally found his voice. This is absurd. You can't simply replace a global consulting firm with a single individual who doesn't even have a company yet. Actually, I interjected, displaying a new document on my screen. Morgan Strategic Partners LLC was registered 30 minutes ago through an expedited filing. My attorney has prepared all necessary documentation to assume administrative responsibilities for the partnership. This was partly true. Gabrielle had indeed helped me file the preliminary paperwork during our break, though many details would need to be finalized in the coming days. But in negotiations, confidence often creates its own reality. Furthermore, Victoria Hamilton added, our legal teams have confirmed that since the intellectual property underlying the partnership framework belongs to Elizabeth, transitioning administrative responsibilities to her firm actually simplifies the legal structure and reduces potential complications. Benjamin Wilson nodded. From Wilson Energy's perspective, this solution maintains the business benefits we've spent 18 months developing, while eliminating the governance concerns that emerged tonight. Leonard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You'll be hearing from G&E's attorneys. This is a coordinated effort to undermine our company. We'll sue for tortious interference, breach of contract, and corporate espionage. Catherine Foster intervened. Leonard, that's enough. The board has convened an emergency session and voted to place you on administrative leave pending an investigation into tonight's events. Effective immediately, you are not authorized to make threats or commitments on behalf of G&E. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Leonard's mouth opened and closed without sound, while Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. In light of these developments, Catherine continued addressing the client. CEOs, the board requests a 72-hour pause before any contracts are finalized, allowing us to conduct a preliminary investigation and determine G&E's official position. Julia Winters responded diplomatically. We understand the board's position and appreciate the request for time. However, our companies have business imperatives that require us to move forward with this partnership without extended delays. Perhaps a compromise, I suggested. The partner companies could proceed with establishing the framework using Morgan Strategic Partners as the administrator, while leaving open the possibility of GNE involvement in specific aspects pending the board's review. This approach offered a face-saving option for GNE, while allowing the partnership to proceed without Leonard's interference. After some discussion of the technical details, all parties agreed to this approach. "There's one more matter to address, Maxwell Henderson," said, turning to me. "Elizabeth, your new company will need resources to effectively administer this partnership. Would you be open to bringing some of your team from GNE to Morgan Strategic Partners?" The question took me by surprise, though it shouldn't have. Administering a $1.6 billion five-company partnership would require more than just me. "I would certainly be interested in building an appropriate team," I replied, carefully aware that Catherine and other board members were listening. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "The board would need to review any transition of personnel, but given the circumstances, we might be open to an organized transfer of key team members to ensure continuity for the client partnership." It was a remarkable concession, essentially acknowledging that GNE might facilitate the very transition Leonard had feared, me taking clients and team members to a competing firm. The difference was that Leonard had precipitated this outcome through his own unethical actions. As the discussion continued, focusing now on implementation details, I noticed Leonard had disappeared from the call. Daniel remained looking increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation proceeded without his input. By 1:45 a.m., we had outlined a framework for moving forward. Morgan Strategic Partners would administer the partnership using the original contract terms. Key team members from GNE might transition to MSP with board approval. The five partner companies would sign letters of intent tonight, with final contracts to be executed within 72 hours. "I believe we've addressed the critical path items," Samuel Richardson concluded. "Unless there are other urgent matters, I suggest we reconvene tomorrow with our respective legal teams to finalize the documentation." As the meeting prepared to adjourn, Victoria Hamilton raised her hand. "Before we close, I want to acknowledge what we've witnessed tonight. Elizabeth, the professionalism you've displayed under extraordinary pressure has been remarkable. Many people would have crumbled when publicly fired during a client call. Instead, you maintained your composure and found a solution that works for everyone." "I agree completely," Maxwell added. "In 30 years of business, I've never seen someone turn a career catastrophe into an entrepreneurial opportunity so effectively. It's a testament to your character and capabilities." Their words touched me deeply. After hours of strategic thinking and legal maneuvering, the emotional impact of the night's events was finally breaking through my professional facade. "Thank you," I said simply. "Your support means more than I can express." As the call ended at 2:03, exactly 2 hours after Leonard had announced my termination, I sat motionless in my home office. The screens around me still displayed contract language and negotiation notes, but everything had changed. I was no longer an executive at Global Nexus Enterprises. I was now the founder and CEO of Morgan Strategic Partners, with 5 industry giants as my founding clients. The journey from terminated employee to business owner had taken precisely 121 minutes. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of legal consultations, paperwork filings, and strategic planning. By 2:17 a.m. on the third day, exactly 72 hours after the fateful call began, I sat in my newly rented office space, signing the final partnership agreements as the CEO of Morgan Strategic Partners, LLC. The contracts formalized what had seemed impossible, just days before my new company would administer the $1.6 billion partnership between 5 industry giants, with an initial 3-year engagement and options for extension. News of Leonard's spectacular misstep spread quickly through business circles. By noon of the first day, the GNE board had announced his resignation to pursue other opportunities, a corporate speak for a forced exit. Further investigation revealed that Leonard had been planning my removal for months, gradually positioning Daniel Cooper to take over my client relationships, while systematically excluding me from strategic discussions. What Leonard hadn't anticipated was the strength of the relationships I had built over 16 years. He had seen clients as institutional relationships belonging to the company, not personal connections built on trust and mutual respect. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of how business actually works at the highest levels. Within a week, I had leased office space in Midtown Manhattan and begun building my team. Stephanie, my loyal assistant of 8 years, was the first to join. "Did you really think I'd stay at GNE after what they did to you?" she asked when I called to offer her a position. Catherine Foster, acting as interim CEO of GNE, reached out with a surprising proposal: a formal transition agreement allowing key team members to join Morgan Strategic Partners in exchange for a modest finder's fee on the partnership contract. It was an elegant solution that allowed GNE to save face while facilitating the inevitable migration of talent. By the end of the first month, Morgan Strategic Partners had grown to 11 employees, most former GNE colleagues who had worked with me for years. We established headquarters in New York with satellite offices planned for London, Tokyo, and Singapore to service the global partnership. The 5 partner companies moved forward with their collaboration, as planned, with my firm providing the coordination and oversight originally intended for GNE. The launch proceeded smoothly, thanks to the framework we had spent 18 months developing. Beyond the initial 5 clients, inquiries began coming in from other companies who had heard about our formation. The story of my midnight firing and subsequent triumph had become something of a business legend, enhanced by Leonard's hasty departure and the rapid success of my new venture. 6 weeks after that fateful call, I met Natalie for lunch at our favorite restaurant. She had been my sounding board throughout the transition, providing both legal advice and emotional support. "I have to say," she remarked, as we settled into our booth when I told you to protect yourself that night, "I didn't expect you to launch a multi-million-dollar consulting firm before breakfast." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Neither did I. But looking back, this was probably inevitable. The only question was whether it would happen on my terms or someone else's. "How does it feel?" she asked, "being your own boss, after 16 years of corporate life?" I considered the question carefully. Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I'm responsible for everything now, from client relationships to making sure the office has coffee. But I'm also free to build something that reflects my values, not someone else's. And the work-life balance you always talked about improving. This had been a persistent topic in our friendship. For years, Natalie had gently suggested that my all-consuming dedication to GNE came at too high a personal cost. "I've implemented mandatory weekend disconnects for the entire team," I told her. "No emails, no calls from Friday night to Monday morning unless there's a genuine emergency. And I've started taking sailing lessons on Saturdays." Sailing? Natalie's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You've been talking about learning since college." "Life's too short to keep postponing the things that matter," I replied. If nothing else, getting fired in the middle of the night taught me that. 3 months after founding Morgan Strategic Partners, I encountered Leonard in the lobby of the Four Seasons during a business conference. He was speaking with a group of executives, but fell silent when he saw me. The others, sensing the tension, quickly made excuses and departed. For a moment we stood alone in the elegant space, the architect of my professional crisis, and the unexpected beneficiary of his actions. "Elizabeth?" He nodded stiffly. "Leonard," I replied evenly. He seemed to struggle with what to say next. "I hear your firm is doing well." "Yes, we are, thank you." Another awkward pause. "You know, I never intended," he began, then stopped himself. "Well, perhaps things worked out for the best." It was as close to an apology as a man like Leonard could manage. Rather than dwelling on the past or indulging in righteous anger, I simply smiled. "Perhaps they did. I wish you success in your next venture, Leonard." As I walked away, I realized I genuinely meant it. The bitterness I had initially felt had faded, replaced by a profound gratitude. Leonard's attempt to destroy my career had instead liberated me from golden handcuffs I might never have removed myself. 6 months after that midnight call, Morgan Strategic Partners had grown to 28 employees with offices in 4 countries. Our client list had expanded beyond the original 5 companies, to include 15 major corporations seeking our expertise in complex multi-party negotiations. The lesson I share most often with the young professionals I now mentor is this: your value lies not in your title or your company affiliation, but in the unique expertise and relationships you build throughout your career. No one can take those away from you, not even a CEO with a termination notice at midnight. I also established a firm policy of mentoring women in business, particularly those navigating male-dominated industries. Once a month, I host a dinner for emerging female leaders, sharing both strategies and support for the challenges they face. The experience of being publicly undermined by a male superior is unfortunately common, and I'm determined to help others navigate similar situations with resilience. Looking back on that pivotal night, I realized that being fired was the best thing that ever happened to my career. It forced me to recognize my true value and to build something authentic on that foundation. The 3 decades of business relationships that Leonard thought would end with my termination instead became the cornerstone of my new beginning. So if you're watching this and facing your own professional crisis, remember sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a powerful new beginning in disguise. Your skills, your relationships, and your reputation are portable assets that no employer can take from you. Have you ever had a career setback that ultimately led to something better? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video helped give you perspective on your own professional journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more business transformation stories, and share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my story. And remember, your greatest professional asset is the one looking back at you in the mirror.